Good morning. I am Ben Wickler, the chair of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. Grateful to everyone for joining us this morning. This morning's call is about the next most critical front in the fight for democracy and voting rights in the United States, which is the states. States like Wisconsin, Arizona, and Michigan are now at the front lines to prevent a coup in 2024 by preventing Republicans and opponents of democracy from taking over total control in critical states in 2022. And we're joined today by myself, the Wisconsin Democratic Party chair, Raquel Teran, the chair of the Arizona Dems, and Lavora Barnes, the chair of the Michigan Dems. State parties are central in the battle to ensure that opponents of democracy don't win at every level, from the most local to the statewide, in these contests. So I'm very pleased about our program this morning. You'll hear from each of us chairs, and then we'll open it up for questions and answer. We didn't pass the federal legislation, so fighting in the states, especially to ensure Republicans don't get trifecta control of these critical states, is Plan B, and we're on the job. I'm so pleased to introduce my fellow chair, the chair of the Arizona Democratic Party, State Senator Raquel Teran. Over to you, Raquel.
Thank you so much, Ben, for bringing us together. I'm so excited to start our Arizona Day here. It's early in Arizona, but this is the best way to start with a collective call to action on voting rights. My name is Raquel Teran, and I'm an Arizona State Senator and the chair for the Arizona Democratic Party. And I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that we are all on this call today. Like our partners in Michigan and Wisconsin, Arizona is experiencing a attack on voting rights. Everybody knows about the sham audit or fraud that took place after the 2020 election, but that was just the beginning. Republicans in our state legislature have been active in putting forward bills that will make it harder for people to vote, including one last year that will remove thousands of the voters from the extremely popular 80% of Arizona voters vote on the early voting list. They made it so that it will be easier to purge voters from that list, and also took away the permanent. They made it the so-called active voting list. Already this session, which has only just started a few weeks ago, Republicans have introduced 100 voter suppression bills. While there are many to choose from, but one egregious example is HB 2596, which will give the legislature the power to overturn election results if they disagree with the outcome, ultimately taking away the voice of the people of Arizona. This bill would also put many things in place to make it harder for people to vote. It would limit polling centers to 1,500 across the state, which would be a logistical nightmare and a result in long wait times and long travel times for voters in rural areas and all our tribal communities. It would also prohibit non-excuse early voting entirely, eliminating voting centers and making Arizona an excuse-only absentee ballot state with a required affidavit. And so the simple fact is that these bills and the over 100 bills that were introduced show how determined Republicans are in silencing voters and making it harder for people to vote. But we are prepared to put up a fight. Last year, we launched a first of its kind year-round organizing program called Project 1530, a nod to our 15 counties and our 30 legislative districts that we have here in Arizona. We have never had a permanent organizing effort, but as an organizer myself, I know how important that work is to preserve democracy. For the last 6 months, our 1530 staff has been on the ground, and what they're doing is connecting with voters, registering new ones from the city center of Phoenix to the border communities of San Luis, Arizona. We are so proud of the work that they have been doing and cannot wait to see the results of these efforts this November and, of course, beyond. And speaking of November, we have several critical statewide races that will be key to protecting the vote. First, we have our governor's race, and our friends in Michigan and Wisconsin have been lucky to have a Democratic governor who will veto these dangerous voter suppression bills that come out of the state legislature. But for us, having a Democrat in that seat will ensure the safety of our right to vote and will send a message to Arizona, to the country, that Arizona is a state that values everyone's voices. Currently, one of the frontrunners in the governor's race is Carrie Lake, who, for those of you who are not familiar with her, she believes in the big lie. She's spreading conspiracy theories and is endorsed by former President Donald Trump. She has been one on the record of saying that she would not have voted to certify Arizona's recent elections, wants to jail anyone associated with the 2020 election, and has been campaigning exclusively on lies and very dangerous rhetoric. Our Secretary of State is also up for election. As overseer of these elections, we need a Democrat in DC. One of the candidates for Secretary of State is Representative Mark Fincham. He is a proud member of the Oath Keepers, whose leader was charged with sedation conspiracy. He was also on the steps of the Capitol at the January 6th riots and played a role in organizing the attempted insurrection. This person is on the ballot to potentially be the Secretary of State if he wins the nomination. He, like Carrie Lake, would not have certified our election results and campaigns they're campaigning on conspiracy theories. I really cannot stress enough how detrimental it would be to our democracy if these two individuals and any candidate like them were to be elected into office. Lastly, just 2 weeks ago, our party formally endorsed a critical ballot initiative that will address many of the greatest threats to voting in Arizona, including prohibiting the legislature from overturning future presidential elections. It establishes both the same day and automatic voter registration, restores the popular permanent early voting list, and expands voting access to Arizonans with disabilities. This initiative, along with the critical state level races we just highlighted earlier, demonstrate how important our state parties and state elections will be in the effort to safeguard our democracy. Now you'll hear from Michigan Democratic Party Chairwoman Laura Barnes, who is going to tell you all about what is happening in your state. Chair, I'm so glad to be with you, and let's please kick it off.
Thank you so much, Raquel. It's so great to be here with you. So great to stand with you and with my friend Ben in this fight for democracy. I want to tell you all, Michigan is the epicenter of so much that's going on in the 2020 elections and the invention of big lie. It's no surprise that voting rights are it's under attack all across the country. But let me be clear. There's more than just attack on voting rights. This is straight up Jim Crow era voter suppression. And it isn't just happening in Michigan or Wisconsin or Arizona. It's happening in every corner of our country. The obvious solution was to have Congress pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. This would have guaranteed that voters of every eligible voter in this country would have been protected. That didn't happen. I'm proud that both of Michigan's US Senators, Gary Peters and Debbie Stabenow, voted in favor of the legislation, but obviously I can't say the same for the rest of the Senate. So we're taking matters into our own hands here in Michigan, and it's an understatement when I tell you we have a lot of work to do. Luckily, we have a partner in the White House and in the governor's house here in Michigan, standing with us as we fight to ensure every voter can access the polls and be assured that their vote counts. Following the 2020 elections, there were many legislative hearings searching for voter fraud and sharing disinformation. The Republican-led legislature introduced 39 voter suppression bills, and then dozens more were introduced and voted upon. Each one has been vetoed by our terrific governor, Governor Whitmer. We need Governor Whitmer to return to that seat after this election to continue to block legislation coming from the Republicans. But also because of an quirk in our Constitution that allows for a pretty simple process for a citizen-led petition, We're now fighting a petition that would circumvent the governor's veto and turned this voter suppression witch hunt into law. So we are actively asking folks to decline to sign, to not put their names on a petition that will take away the ability to access the polls, to read the petitions as folks find them in the streets, and make sure they know what they're signing when they're signing. It is well known that petition gatherers who are working for this process and for the Republicans will lie. The second thing we're going to work on here in Michigan is turning all of Michigan blue in 2022. This is a call to every voter in Michigan. We need you to join us in this fight to save democracy and reelect those women from Michigan. We have plenty of opportunities for folks to engage. We're recruiting and training poll observers and challengers. We want to make sure that what they tried to do in 2020 never happens again. And of course, our third step, vote. When people in Michigan vote, Democrats win. We just proved that in 2020, and we'll do it again in 2022. We've got to vote from the bottom of the ticket, which is where you'll find the folks who actually administer those elections that are so important to us, all the way to the top, where you'll find our governor, who we need to continue to veto these bills, our Secretary of State, who puts in place smart, common sense rules and make sure that our elections are carried out legally and perfectly, and our Attorney General, who will fight anyone who tries to engage in voter suppression or voter fraud. And we can't skip that nonpartisan section of the ballot, because we've got to get judges elected who will make sure that these proposals, when they come before the courts, are treated fairly. And our fourth step, we have colleagues all over the state working on a ballot initiative that's called Promote the Vote 2022. And the 2020 election was the most secure and accurate on record, and the voters of Michigan turned out in record numbers. Promote the Vote 2022 picks up where Proposal 3 of 2018 left off, by taking the extra steps necessary to create a voting system that works for everyone, and making sure that voting is a fundamental right enshrined in our state constitution. We have to take these steps because Michigan is under serious attack by the GOP. The chair and the co-chair of the Michigan Republican Party funded busloads of people to go to that January 6th insurrection. The chair of the party referred to our governor, attorney general, and secretary of state as witches that should be prepared to be burned at the stake. The co-chair recently made a racist Facebook post about our lieutenant governor, and not shocking, she is both anti-mask and anti-vax. And possibly in the most egregious of her actions, she led the efforts to seat fake electors back in December of 2020 and sent that list of fake electors to the National Archives. She has an entire group of people following her, doing as she says and believing she has their best interest at heart, the best interest of Michigan at heart. And with each of her ridiculous actions, we see over and over again that that's not true. Congress might be able to help us, but the Michigan Democratic Party has this under control. We're going to fight until the end to make sure we stop her and the rest of the GOP for taking over the state and from taking us down the path to fewer rights for the citizens of Michigan. I want to turn it now over to my friend Ben Wickler, the chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, to close out our gathering.
Thank you so much, Chair Barnes. Everywhere in our country, democracy is under threat, voting rights are under threat. But the cold math of this situation is that if Democrats have the governorships in at least 3 of Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Trump won't be able to steal the 2024 election. The path to engineer a Trump coup depends on being able to suppress the vote or overturn the results in enough states to get an electoral college majority. And if we hold the governorship in at least 3 of these states, Republicans simply can't do it. So the fight in these states has incredible national implications. And the good news is that the grassroots energy pouring into these state parties in these 5 critical states, and very much in the 3 states represented here on this call today, is enormous, unprecedented for a midterm with a Democratic president, as far as I've seen in Wisconsin, and I think my colleagues would agree. There's a keen sense of the national stakes and the stakes in our states for the necessity of fighting and winning at every level. Wisconsin was the tipping point state in both 2016 and 2020. 4 of the last 6 presidential elections here have come down to less than 1 percentage point. That means that a small change, a small margin, can mean statewide loss or victory. At the moment, Democrats hold every statewide elected office, with the exception of Senator Ron Johnson's seat, the exception for the moment, I should say, and Republicans have a 1-seat edge in our state Supreme Court. That has not stopped Republicans from claiming the mantle of a mandate they don't have to attack voting rights at every level. It's happening in the courts, where a far-right judge ruled in a ruling that has been stayed and is now approaching the state Supreme Court that that drop boxes for absentee ballots would be illegal, which flies in the face of law, practice, and common sense. State legislators have introduced a raft of voter suppression bills that Governor Evers has vetoed. There's even a bill like the one in Arizona that would allow the nullification of statewide elections in instances where the margin of victory is less than the number of absentee ballots that have been cast. This is a direct attack on democracy engineered to allow the overturning of Democratic victories. At the statewide level, Rebecca Kleefisch, Scott Walker's lieutenant governor, and Kevin Nicholson are both running for governor, and both have vowed to eliminate our bipartisan Wisconsin Elections Commission, which was created by Republicans, including the administration of Rebecca Kleefisch and Scott Walker. They want to replace it with partisan elected officials because, in the words of Rebecca Kleefisch, that would mean there's only one throat to choke if something should go wrong. This kind of violent rhetoric directed at election administrators is par for the course, including a partisan sheriff who threatened to jail or recommended the jailing of mayors across our state, and a sham Star Chamber witch hunt investigation commissioned by our state legislature that has threatened to the Racine sheriff threatened to jail our bipartisan election commissioners, and the state legislature commissioned an investigation led by a far-right conspiracy theorist who wanted to jail mayors for refusing to agree to illegal subpoenas in which he wanted to force them to sit down for private interviews away from the light of public transparency. So they're under attack. People who run elections, people who believe in democracy are under attack in our state, as in these other states. But the fight back is extraordinary, and you can see it in one of the most critical, most proximate fights. April 5th, there are local elections all across Wisconsin in communities with hundreds of thousands of residents for things like mayor, city council, county board, many offices that affect election administration rules. We can see far-right candidates running for these seats. I'll name Melissa Eck, who is running for Green Bay City Council. She organized the Stop the Steal protest at the mayor of Green Bay's house on January 6th. She ran the Stop the Steal Facebook page, and she's running for city council in the third largest city in Wisconsin. But Democrats are organizing all over our state. We have dozens of organizers on our staff with our year-round organizing program. Already, our volunteers have called tens of thousands of voters just in January across the state of Wisconsin. And so for these local elections this spring, and for statewide offices like ensuring the re-election of Governor Tony Evers first and foremost, and Attorney General Josh Kaul, throwing out Ron Johnson, who's called for the state legislature to unilaterally seize power over election administration, and at every level down the line, Democrats and independents and Republican allies of democracy are going to join together to ensure that people who believe that voters decide who leads, not Republican politicians, to ensure that friends of democracy hold the levers to ensure that the popular will is expressed through a democracy in Wisconsin. That's the fight. There's tremendous energy at every level, from poll observers and poll watchers all the way to our tremendous field of candidates against Ron Johnson and our governor's reelection campaign. And we're so fired up to enter this year. And with that, we're so excited to take questions. So please answer your question. You can raise your virtual hand. You can address to any of us or all of us. And I see one right now from Zach Montalaro. Let's see, I'll click answer live. Zach, I think you're potentially now unmuted to be able to ask your question. Maybe not. So your question is about the case looking to ban drop boxes in our state, what happens with the state Supreme Court. And the short answer is that there are hundreds of drop boxes across Wisconsin used in 2020, safe, convenient, legal, with full support from our bipartisan elections commission. There's not a shred of evidence that it led to any fraud or irregularities. And there's strong guidance from the Wisconsin Elections Commission about how to ensure that they are secure. So although there are these far-right attempts to try to throw them out, voters are in fact voting at this very moment in the February 15th primary for our spring election using drop boxes. And the law is pretty clear, and voters have a pretty clear opportunity to be able to to cast their ballots in defiance of Republicans who want to make it harder for people to vote, and in support of a free and fair democracy. Clara Hendrickson, I see your hand raised. Let's see. Okay, are you unmuted? You should be able to ask your question. And if not, then maybe you could put it in the chat. Okay, unmute not working. The RNC has launched an aggressive election worker recruitment effort. Do you have concerns about that effort? If so, why?
She did drop her question in the chat. She said she's having
Oh, we got
problems
it.
unmuting.
Yeah, I just read it.
Yeah.
Laura,
Yeah, I think I'm going to jump in here because yes, we absolutely have concern about it, and multi-level concern. First of all, we don't know how these folks are going to be trained or what they're going to be told to do when they show up to participate in these programs around our elections. And we very much want to make sure that anyone who is involved in our elections has been trained by the clerks and by the system put in place to do the proper job, and not just to intimidate voters and make them feel uncomfortable about voting. And my fear is that this program, as I read about it in the news and in social media, is designed to do intimidation much more than observation. So we are very concerned about it. We're keeping an eye on it. We're making sure that our folks are aware that it's happening. And our folks, by the way, who are going to be there as well, will be trained and will understand what the rules are and what the proper activities are that they can engage in, and will continue to do their jobs properly as volunteers here. But these folks do concern me a great deal. Yes.
I would echo that concern, Chair Barnes, and and that's why we are preparing. We're preparing as well. We have had our voter protection committee volunteers who have been tracking what's happening at the state legislature, who have been communicating with our legislative district chairs and all our members to make sure that we're preparing for each and every election where we will need our own folks also monitoring these polls. In addition to that, we have on board professional voter protection leaders who are staff within the party to start preparing for all these efforts. So we are not hiring 2 months before the election. We have people on board right now because the threat to democracy right now is very serious. Thank you.
I will pick up on that as well. Also in Wisconsin, I believe Michigan's in the same boat. For the first time in our history, we've run a year-round voter protection program that continued all the way through 2021 and this year. That team has built a tremendous network of volunteers across the state, recruited poll workers and poll observers. We'll have them in the spring elections as well. So although the RNC is publicizing their efforts enormously, it's been striking to see how many regular folks, all the way from volunteers entering this work for the first time to election protection attorneys are stepping up to be a part of the fight to protect democracy this year. We have a bunch of other questions lined up, and if unmuting doesn't work, then please throw them in the chat. The order that I've seen them is Philip, David, Barbara, Zach, Matt. So I think that's the order that I see. And Philip, maybe you could throw your question in the chat or say it out loud if you are unmuted. Is there more coordination? Or no, Philip, here we go. 2 questions. You're calling this Plan B. Is there an acknowledgement about Plan A? And there is a drop in support among Black voters in Washington. Are the states the real backstop for the Democratic Party's fortunes this fall? I'll just say on federal legislation, never say never on federal legislation. And I think one thing that we've learned from the last 20 years is that bills are often pronounced dead and then turn into federal statute that affect people's lives. So that fight absolutely continues. And I know from our partners in Washington, D.C., that there are tremendous creative efforts moving forward to try to protect democracy in federal legislation. Any colleagues want to speak to the broad work? The lack of progress on voting rights is a challenge. I think that the key thing that we've seen happen in state after state is that when there's a setback, it can take the wind out of you, and then you get it back up the next day and you fight even harder. Republican attempts to suppress the vote actually can infuriate people, so that we organize and find ways around the hurdles that they put up to ensure we get out even more voters. And that is why in these states and so many others, this battle absolutely continues. Um, David, I see you're next up, and then Barbara.
You hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Look, so I'm in Michigan here. So if you could kind of give me the state of play in Wisconsin, I've got a pretty good handle on Arizona in terms of what the Republicans have that would allow them to overturn votes, limit the number of polling places, that sort of thing. Like, what are you up against in your state that you really need to mobilize on, do you think?
So Republicans can't pass a bill because Governor Evers has vetoed and vowed to veto every bill that makes it harder to vote. So unless they get the governorship, and which is their goal, they will not be able to suppress or overturn elections that way. They're trying to do it through the courts, where they are losing court cases because the law is very clear about this, and they're trying to do it by taking over local offices where we are fighting back. But the critical thing is for Governor Evers to continue on in the governor's residence, ensuring that democracy is not eroded in Wisconsin. Barbara, you had the next question. The exact numbers, there have been 6 voter suppression bills that have already been vetoed. There are many, many more that are coming in Wisconsin. Now, I think we're almost at time, but I want to, let's see, Zach, do you want to share your question? And Matt has a question. I want to make sure my fellow chairs, I've answered a couple in a row, so I want to make sure to open up space for my colleagues here.
Well, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. So in response to the RNC opening a Hispanic community center in Milwaukee last September, this is for you, Chair Wickler, by the way, sorry, Wisconsin. Are there any specific strategies that you have to win over Hispanic voters in Wisconsin?
I will say, for the first time in our party's history, we've run a year-round coalitions operation with a Latino coalitions manager. We've run Spanish language poll worker recruitment programs to make sure that people speaking the language that the voters in their community speak are there working polls and observing polls. And our organizing team has unprecedented depth with Latino leaders at multiple levels of management and organization, partnering with organizations like Voces de la Frontera and other groups that have tremendous roots and credibility in the Latino communities in Wisconsin. This is a tremendous area of focus, and the Latino population has grown by 1/3. It's the fastest growing group in Wisconsin since the last census, so it could be a critical determinant in the next elections. Matt, you have a question, and I see there's a questions each for Raquel and Lavora. If folks can stay another minute, I'd love to keep going for another second.
That works.
Matt, do you have I don't know if you're able to.
Ben, I see a question directly for Arizona. If
Yeah,
you might answer it.
Please,
It's
perfect.
Emily Sasia from Cronkite News. Arizona is currently a trifecta state with a governorship and state house and Senate having Republican majority. Knowing this, how likely will you think it is that Democrats will be able to pass voting legislation on the state level? So at this point, what us as Democrats, we have to do at our state legislature with Arizonans engaged is play defense. We are ensuring that these bills don't get past each of our chambers. And I do have to remind everybody that Arizona is a battleground state, and it shows at our state legislature. We are 2 seats away from majorities in the House, 2 seats away in majorities in the Senate. So we always just need one Republican to block legislation. So we need to make sure that we are amplifying how extreme Republicans are on voter suppression, and make it very, very uncomfortable for anybody to vote for these bills that will hinder our democracy. And so we are in complete defense. And then also we are organizing, like I said in my remarks at the beginning, we're organizing around a ballot initiative that will ensure voter protection, that will ensure that people have access to the ballot box. So it comes back to the fact that we need to be having conversations in our communities, continue the organizing work to both block and to make sure that this initiative gets on the ballot, and voters of Arizona, like they've proven in the past, progressively vote for this initiative that will give access to the ballot box.
Thank you, Raquel. And there's a last question for Lavora from Malachi Barrett. I don't know if you have
I
the.
see. I see it. Malachi wants to know about poll watchers and challengers, and yes, we absolutely have. As Ben mentioned, we have a year-round voter protection program as well that has volunteers that are engaged in all the elections, not just the even-numbered November elections. And we have over 5,000 volunteers as part of that program right now, and it continues to grow because the one thing, as Ben mentioned, that we know, the more attacks there are on voting rights, the more people stand up here in Michigan and say, I want to help you fight, point me in the direction of what I can do to help. And they join our voter protection team and become volunteers and get very active. So we expect to have as many, if not more, volunteers than the GOP is recruiting to make sure that we are protecting the vote all over the state here in Michigan. Thanks for asking, Malachi.
The last question I see is Jonathan Oosting has your virtual hand raised.
Yeah, hi, thanks. This question is also for Lavora. Hi, Lavora.
Hey.
I know, sorry if this came up, I had to jump off for another call, but I know MDP is opposing the Secure My Vote initiative.
Absolutely.
You mentioned the Decline to Sign campaign, but does the state party have any plan to back either the new voting rights initiatives announced in recent weeks, like Promote the Vote, for instance, announced it's doing a petition drive? Is that something MDP will get involved with?
Yeah, I expect that most of the MDP family is probably already raising their hands to sign up to help with the Promote the Vote initiative. They are good partners. The folks who are working on that program are good partners with the party, and we will be partnering with them to make sure we move that ballot initiative forward.
Thank you so much. These have been fantastic questions. I'll invite Raquel and Lavora to say a quick closing word before we wrap up.
I'll just jump in here and say that, you know, we know that this is a tough election cycle for all of us, for Democrats, and I am thrilled to have partners like my fellow chairs in Arizona and Wisconsin. These are people that I can call to ask for advice, support, and help, and I appreciate that. And know that we are all in this fight to win. We are all in this fight, not just to elect Democrats up and down the ballot, but to protect democracy. That's why we're here, and it's what we're going to do.
Amen, amen, amen. I love it, chairs. It's been a pleasure to start off the morning with you all, because my next thing is going to our state legislature, and we are in fight back mode. So we definitely understand that the last 2 years have been just exhausting, and not just politically, but in practically every other aspect of our lives. So what we're doing is we're focusing on making sure that we connect with voters, and that's Democrats, that's independents, and even Republicans. So because Democrats do not just legislate to help other Democrats, we legislate to help everyone. And so we will gloat about the American Rescue Plan, the bipartisan infrastructure laws, and we will make sure that voters know all that Democrats have delivered. And even though there might be barriers to voting, we will figure out how to overcome those barriers and make sure that we get our communities to the ballot box and win again in November. Thank you. Ben, back to you.
Thanks so much, Chair Tehran. Thank you so much, Chair Barnes. Picking up on what Chair Tehran just said, Democrats have delivered on infrastructure. Democrats are making sure folks have clean water, that roads are being repaired. We're investing in our schools. We're getting shots into arms and protecting people when Republicans are pushing against vaccinations that now the overwhelming share of voters have already gotten. Democrats are delivering on our messages about voters' lives. Republicans' message is just about attacking democracy and making it harder for people to vote. So we're out organizing the right in the fight for democracy, and we're out messaging the right in the fight to actually improve things for regular people. And that's a winning recipe. We're so grateful to President Biden and Vice President Harris, to our Democratic governors and Democratic Secretary of State in Arizona, who are ensuring that there's executive leadership in the states that believes that voters should decide. And we're so grateful for everyone joining us this morning. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.